Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this edition of Generación's Get Future Ready live stream. My name is Mattew Garza, graduate assistant for Generación STEM at Texas State. I'm so excited to be back for another Get Future Ready session, and this week I am joined by a very special guest, Mattew Garza. Mr. Garza, it's a pleasure to be able to chat with you today about your work as a supply chain analyst for Signify.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and share my experiences. Hopefully I can, inspire others to, continue on in STEM and, get them excited for the workforce. I think there's plenty to be excited about. So thank you for having me.
Definitely. Before we get into the more technical part of this conversation, will you please give us a bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So born and raised in Houston, Texas, up through high school, and went to college originally in Colorado, and I transferred to Texas State. I was originally undecided as a major, and with a couple of internships I've had in the oil and gas industry, I ended up deciding on studying industrial engineering at Texas State. And that was a blast. I really liked it. And that actually, that role at Texas State, naturally progressed into my role now as a supply chain analyst. So we'll talk about that more later, but I've worked in, internships in the oil and gas industry, and then primarily in manufacturing and operations, and then eventually into supply chain. But it's been a blast, and glad to be here and to tell you about it.
That sounds great. And well, we asked you to be here today because we want our students to learn more about what career opportunities are available for them to explore or after they complete their STEM career at Texas State. Can you tell us a little bit more about your job?
Yeah, sure. So currently I'm a supply chain analyst for a manufacturing company, Signify. So Signify is the global leader in lighting for, various products for outdoor fixtures for parking garages, football stadiums, things like that. I originally started in the, I had a project with Texas State, with Signify in particular, used to be Philips Lighting, with the warehouse team optimizing the layout of the particular warehouse. And that naturally progressed into an industrial engineering role where I got to work with, manufacturing, fabrication, paint, and a whole bunch of different departments across the company. So that was fantastic. So I did that for a couple of years. And then I moved into supply chain as a planner, and then eventually into my current role as a supply chain analyst. So that's been really great. What my job is now is typically dealing with reducing our excess inventories. That's obviously a big issue for many companies, even in manufacturing and across distributions in other fields. So I deal a lot with reducing our inventories, and a lot with project planning for product life cycles. So as we introduce new products and we phase old products out, I'm heavily involved with the planning aspect of that to make sure that everything goes smoothly from procurement to supply chain, and there are no hiccups along the line. So that way, when we launch a new product, there's no hiccups in terms of supply chain. And when we phase an old product out, we don't have excess inventory. So it's really key for someone like me to analyze all the inventories that we have, talk to different people, across, supply chain, procurement, product management, even R&D, to make sure that everything's in line. So we save the company money, essentially. You don't want to have excess inventories. No company wants to have excess inventories, and especially you don't want inventories to be obsoleted. So that's a big part of my job. I also work really closely with our buying team. So all the individuals that actually purchase components for new orders to supply customer orders, I work with those people in supply chain locally and from different manufacturing plants across the country to make sure that we can expedite components on time to deliver a finished good to a customer quickly when we promised. So I work closely with a lot of the buyers and make sure that we're adhering to all of our standards with our systems, and we look at we deal a lot with using our forecasting tools. So I work with a lot of the buyers and supply chain teams to make sure that, we're sticking to our standards, looking at our forecast, making sure everything is set up correctly in our system and that we're executing properly. So work with quite a few people within the supply chain teams locally and from other plants and around the country and even in Canada and Mexico to make sure that, we're all in line. It's, it's a big global company. So, we have to be communicating with everyone. I think that, I typically, like I said, communicate a lot with supply chain people, but even, product managers in R&D, as we not only, phase in or phase out products, new products and old products, we might even have, product upgrades or just changes in technology. We need to be able to keep up with, the changes in the market. So I'm also heavily involved with, making sure that as our suppliers change the components that they actually give to us, that we are ready and our system is ready to receive those new components, and that, our engineering teams are, have everything updated in our system to accept those new components, and that way it all flows smoothly as we change from old components to new components, just given technology changes from our vendors, our suppliers, and also internally as we want to just manage, different customer orders with different specifications. So heavily involved with the engineering team as well. So that's kind of a brief background of what I do here at Signify as an analyst. I think that this particular role as a supply chain analyst is pretty common across the manufacturing industry. Not only in lighting, but automotive and semiconductors. There's many different more components that go into a vehicle. As you can imagine, compared to a lighting fixture. So my role is definitely common and used across variety of manufacturing companies. So it's pretty common. I think that a lot of my peers with my same role across other Signify manufacturing plants, and even at higher levels in supply chain. We actually do have industrial engineering degrees, which is what I graduated with at Texas State. So even though my title is not an industrial engineer, a lot of the classes and things that we learned at Texas State, are geared towards, inventory, analytics. You got to use some basic math. You don't have to use, calculus and other things every day. That's more in, product engineering support and in R&D. When it comes to testing out, new products or existing products for quality issues or warranty issues or things like that. But for my role, I really use a lot of the, holistic analysis tools that I learned at Texas State. So that's been, really great to have under my belt and, talk about with other people in my company that actually have the same degree, not necessarily from Texas State, but from other institutions across the company. Across the country.
Well, that sounds like a really interesting role. Can you tell us a little bit more about what steps you took to prepare professionally for this job?
Sure. So, like I said, I did a capstone project with Texas State with Philips Lighting at the time, which eventually turned into Signify. So I got in my foot in the door that way through Texas State. And as that ended, I immediately went into an internship here at Texas State. Here at Signify. But while I was in that internship, while I progressed into different roles in the production team as an industrial engineer, I was constantly interacting with people across the entire company, locally, I should say, people across this plant, in different departments. Not only the production team, I was working with the engineers, I was working with supply chain, and even the order entry team. Just talking to people, establishing relationships, making sure that we're all executing, our own tasks in the most efficient way possible. As industrial engineer does, we're always looking for the best way to do things to, save the company money, to get the product out as quickly as possible, reduce waste everywhere you can. So, as soon as I got here, I've been dealing with different people across this local plant as much as possible. I think that really prepared me for this role that I'm in today, now that I work with, product managers and people in this building and outside the building, across the world. So, really, really getting to know people. And, that's something that I didn't necessarily expect as a student. How important that is to talk to different people outside of, just your confines of your particular role, who you think you can, go in day out and just do your job. Well, you might actually need to talk to different people across different departments, just for a particular project, but you probably will, use that relationship later on in your career if you stay with the same company. So that was really good for me. I also think that, what did I do to progress into this role? What skills did I acquire along the way that prepared me for this role? I think that, I'm always open to accepting new projects and even learning new things. Even if I don't necessarily need to do a certain project that someone's talking about or learn a new technique for what they're doing in my particular role today, I could easily use it down the line. For example, there were a lot of Excel macros that our company uses to create local files in supply chain, right? So I was originally using those files, a couple of years ago, but I quickly became a backup person for someone who created those files and maintained those files. So even though I didn't necessarily need to know how to use Excel macros 2 years ago, today I use them almost every day. So, always be open to learning new things, accepting new projects, when you have the bandwidth. That's key. Always be open, always be learning. Sometimes people say, as soon as you stop learning, that's when you start backsliding. So I think it's definitely key to keep learning outside of Texas State in the professional industry, I think. And also, I definitely sharpened my Excel skills as a whole, in supply chain. A couple of years into my career here, I think that is something that every student should really be doing. I know that as a student, you're working with Excel, but you might as well, sharpen those skills early on, even at Texas State, be able to navigate that program faster and use it to your benefit. It's going to be a great tool. It's used so much in engineering and supply chain and procurement, and as an industrial engineer who can work across all of those departments in a manufacturing company. So I think Microsoft Excel is definitely key. Also, PowerPoint, obviously, and presenting skills is pretty important. So those two together are really, really important. I think that, in my field, in supply chain, there are professional certifications that you can achieve. I've studied them a little bit, have never taken the test for those certifications yet, but I know that, people at higher levels in my company have those certifications. So, moving forward, those are, and advice to students, I think acquiring those certifications early is going to help you. It's not going to hurt you at all. Like I said, constantly learning, about your own job, about, things that are going on in your same company, maybe a little bit outside your role is important, but also professionally, for yourself, acquire certifications. I had at Texas State, I took advantage of a lean green belt certification. Mm-hmm. So that was something that I had on my resume for a while. That was really helpful. And even just the knowledge from that course, that was, I really liked it. So having that under my belt was helpful. But also, achieving other certifications is key, especially in the engineering field. I think, there are professional certifications that you need, especially for civil engineering. So those are going to be key. You're going to have those anyways. But even if they're not required, I think that it's definitely doesn't hurt to go out and get those certifications, study for them. And even if you don't, you don't have the certification now, studying for them, you're probably going to use at least some of that information in your role. And if you don't use it in your key role, you're going to use it in your next role. So there's no harm in reaching out and studying those extra topics.
Yes, and can you tell us a little bit more about how you found out about these certifications? Was it through your professors or any organizations?
Yeah, sure. So I originally found out about the Lean Greenbelt certification. I did that at Texas State. So I think that was through my professor. I forget his name at the moment, but I think he's the head of engineering at this point. So that was really nice. I'm grateful to have learned about that while I was a student. And I've learned about other certifications here, just being in this department from my peers, just seeing it on in their emails and talking about it with my bosses. So that's typically how I've learned about those particular certifications. I think you mentioned something about. Did you mention something about co-ops also?
Yes, I haven't asked that question, but do you have any information about co-ops or internships, and would you like to share?
Yeah, sure. So like I mentioned, I did an internship with Texas State with this company, but there are always, nearly every year, and I think there are actually, oddly enough, Texas State students here at the plant today working on something for our production team. So I know that Signify does work with Texas State students in the past. I mean, they have worked with them in the past, and they are continuing to work with them literally today. And I have no reason to think that they will stop doing it. I'm not exactly sure of any, what particular projects they're working on, or if we have plans to work with Texas State again next year. But I'm if I had to bet on it, I absolutely think that Signify is going to reach out to Texas State, or Texas State's going to reach out to Signify, and we're going to accept, working with students again. I think we've had some really good success with some of the projects. Some have, been implemented and make positive changes. Some have, never came to fruition, but I think, they're going to be required. I think, at least as an industrial engineer, when I graduated in 2017, they were required. So I hope they still are, because I think that was key. Even if you don't do a capstone project like that, if you have the bandwidth as a student, especially in your last year, I think grabbing an internship is going to be key.
And if a student was considering this career path, what things can they do while they're in school to better prepare for this type of role?
Yeah, I think I'd go back to really sharpening your Excel skills and your presentation skills, and also your communication skills as a whole. That includes writing and effective emails. That's going to be every company you go into, even if you study engineering, and then you move into a different field altogether. That's going to be key. So presenting, and in my particular role, I think Excel is duly required. So you might as well take advantage of and sharpen those skills early on as a student. You're going to use them at Texas State anyways, so keep using those skills.
Well, thank you so much. If you guys have any questions, you can just drop them in the chat and we'll be able to answer them. So we'll give it a couple of seconds. But for now, I can ask you one of the questions that we have here. What was the hardest part about transitioning to the workforce after your graduation?
Yeah, I think that, after being a student, for at least 4 years, you're accustomed to everyone around you working really hard and executing projects and assignments and, at the same pace that you are. So I think something that was surprising, and I guess you could say harder or challenging after I went into the workforce was just understanding that not everyone is going to be, some people have been already working for 8, 10, 20 years, and they might even be in the same role, so they might not be as excited about learning new things or as a young person might be. So I think just understanding where people are in their professional careers, and just personally just understanding where people are in their life, and respecting that, especially as an industrial engineer. As industrial engineer, you're almost required to talk to different people, and at least in a manufacturing setting, and learn about what they're doing, and more often than not, try to optimize either what they're doing or the process as a whole, or what the company is doing. But I think taking into account what them as a person is really key, because you want to always be respectful in your personal life, but especially in professional settings. You always need to be respectful and understand where people are coming from, even if as a graduate student, coming out, arguably young, more often than not. Graduates are young, but even if you come out and you graduate from Texas State, not typically in your 20s, it's important to understand where people are coming from in the professional setting. So I think that was something that was a little bit surprising to me. I take it just because I had to learn to work with many different people, and not just other industrial engineers. I often worked with manufacturing operators, in fabrication, paint, and assembly settings, when they've been doing assembly and manufacturing work, manual labor for years and years. You need to be respectful of where they're coming from and how we come across.
Yes, and we want to ask you, are you in the same line of work you thought you would be as a student at Texas State, or is it completely different?
It's similar. As a student at Texas State, a lot of the classes were geared around analyzing processes and analyzing data, and especially as an engineering and industrial engineering student, a lot of those classes in industrial engineering, traditionally is geared around making process improvements. So I did a lot of that, process improvements, typically with the actual manufacturing team in the production floor, for a couple of years, and I've slightly moved into a different role as an analyst, more geared towards data analysis. So as a student, I expected to be fully involved with implementing projects to improve production settings, production processes, and now I'm still involved with process improvement projects, but it's more heavily centered around data analysis in terms of for supply chain inventory and even processes. So yes and no. I definitely still do a lot of process improvement projects, which I expected as a Texas State student, and I surprisingly, I'm glad I'm still using a lot of the techniques to analyze data. So yeah, I think Texas State really prepared me well.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a continuous self-discovery in the profession.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yes, Mr. Garza, thank you so much for being here today and helping our students learn more about your career and possible ways to prepare for entering the STEM workforce.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. I can't wait to hear from future students. I hope they're as inspired as I was. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all for joining us today for this edition of Get Future Ready, and have a great day and see you next time. If you're a student at Texas State working towards a career in STEM, please reach out to us so that we can help you navigate your STEM career development here at Texas State. And you can find us on social at Texas State Gen STEM. Thank you.